The day Catherine died was the day I realized how alone I truly was. 47 years of marriage, 3 children we raised together, a modest construction company I built from nothing, all of it meant to create a legacy of love and security. But as I sat in our bedroom that night, her side of the bed empty for the first time, I had no idea that the worst betrayal was yet to come. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered what my family really thought of me and what I did about it. Catherine had been sick for nearly 2 years. Pancreatic cancer. We fought it together like we'd fought everything else in our lives. I sold our vacation cabin in Maine to pay for experimental treatments not covered by insurance. I drove her to every appointment, held her hand through every procedure, and when the doctors finally said there was nothing more they could do, I converted our living room into a hospital room so she could spend her final days at home, surrounded by family photos and the garden view she loved. During those last months, I noticed changes in our children. Michael, our oldest at 45, started visiting more frequently. He would sit with his mother, speaking in hushed tones that would stop whenever I entered the room. Jessica, our 42-year-old daughter, suddenly became interested in our financial affairs, asking Catherine about our investments, insurance policies, and the business I had built over the decades. Even Thomas, our youngest at 38, who had always been distant since moving to California for his tech job, started calling daily and flew home 3 times in Catherine's final months. I was grateful, of course. Catherine deserved to be surrounded by her children to see how much they loved her. If I occasionally felt excluded from their private conversations, I dismissed it as natural, a mother sharing final thoughts with her children. The funeral was on a Tuesday, rainy, which seemed fitting. I stood stoically as friends, neighbors, and business associates paid their respects. Michael handled most of the arrangements, insisting I shouldn't have to worry about details. Jessica organized the reception at our house afterward. Thomas set up a memorial fund in Catherine's name. They were being good children, I thought. Catherine would have been proud. 3 days after we buried my wife, Richard Blackwell, our family attorney for over 30 years, called to schedule the reading of Catherine's will. I was surprised. We had simple wills drawn up years ago, leaving everything to each other, then to be divided equally among our children after we were both gone. Nothing complicated. Nothing that required a formal reading. Catherine made some changes last year, Richard explained, his voice careful. She requested a formal reading with everyone present. That first flicker of unease should have warned me, but grief has a way of dulling your instincts. The reading was scheduled for the following Monday at Richard's downtown office. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit for any appointment. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, led me to the conference room where Richard was arranging documents. "Robert?" He nodded, neither smiling nor frowning. Richard and I had played golf together for decades. He'd been at our anniversary parties, our children's weddings. Today he seemed distant, professional in a way that felt wrong. "Is everything all right, Richard?" I asked. He paused, hands hovering over the papers. "Let's wait for everyone to arrive." Michael arrived next, wearing a suit I didn't recognize, expensive looking with a silk tie. Jessica followed minutes later in a black dress, her husband, Steve, trailing behind her. Thomas was the last to arrive, having flown in from San Francisco that morning. "Dad." They each greeted me with quick hugs that felt perfunctory. None of them took the seats next to me at the long mahogany table. Instead, they clustered together on the opposite side, occasionally exchanging glances I couldn't interpret. Richard cleared his throat. "Now that everyone is present, we can proceed with the reading of Catherine Mitchell's last will and testament, revised and signed on September 17th of last year. Last year, while she was sick, while I was selling assets to pay for her treatments, while I was sleeping on a cot next to her hospital bed. I, Catherine Ann Mitchell, being of sound mind." Richard began the formal legal preamble. I barely heard the words. My eyes were fixed on my children's faces. Michael was leaning forward slightly, his expression intent. Jessica was perfectly still, hands folded on the table. Thomas kept checking his watch, probably worried about his return flight. And so, having considered the contributions, sacrifices, and needs of my family members, I hereby bequeath my assets as follows, Richard continued. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. To my husband, Robert James Mitchell, I leave our family home at 1453 Oak Ridge Lane, with the provision that he may reside there for the remainder of his life. I frowned. Provision? The house had been in both our names since we bought it in 1982. Upon Robert's death, or should he choose to sell the property, the proceeds shall be divided equally among our children. Richard read. My confusion deepened. This wasn't our plan. We had always intended for the survivor to have complete control. Richard continued. My personal jewelry and heirlooms shall be divided among my children as follows. To Michael, my grandmother's diamond brooch and pearl necklace. To Jessica, my engagement ring and wedding band. To Thomas, my collection of antique silver. I felt a pang at the thought of Catherine's wedding ring going to Jessica, rather than staying with me, but I remained silent. My shares in Mitchell Construction Company, representing 50% ownership, shall be divided equally among my 3 children, effective immediately. The room tilted slightly. Catherine's shares in my company, the company I had built from nothing, working 16-hour days for decades, were being transferred directly to our children, without even passing to me first. The remainder of my estate, including all financial accounts, investments, and insurance policies not specifically mentioned herein, shall be divided as follows. 30% to Michael Mitchell, 30% to Jessica Mitchell Reynolds, 30% to Thomas Mitchell, and 10% to Robert Mitchell. 10%. After 47 years of marriage, after working side by side to build everything we had, after caring for her through her illness, bankrupting myself to try every possible treatment, 10%. Richard's voice continued, but the words blurred together. I felt a rushing in my ears like standing too close to a waterfall. I was vaguely aware that the will included specific bequests. Catherine's car to Jessica, her art collection divided among the children, her books to Thomas's wife, items that had been in our home, our shared possessions, distributed without any regard for my attachment to them. When Richard finally finished reading, he looked up. Are there any questions? The silence stretched for several seconds before Michael spoke. When do the shares in the company transfer officially? Effective immediately, Richard answered. I've prepared the necessary paperwork. And the financial accounts? Jessica asked. The transfers can be initiated today. I'll need signatures from all of you. I found my voice at last. Richard, this isn't what we planned. Catherine and I had mirror wills. Everything to the surviving spouse, then to the children after we were both gone. Richard cleared his throat. Catherine amended her will during her illness, Robert. She was very clear about her wishes. Without discussing it with me? Without even telling me? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. She didn't want to upset you while you were dealing with her health issues, Jessica said softly. Mom knew what she was doing. I turned to my children. Did you know about this? The glance they exchanged answered my question before Michael spoke. Mom talked to us about her concerns. Concerns? I echoed. About your ability to manage everything after she was gone, Jessica explained, her tone gentle as if speaking to a child. About ensuring we were all protected. Protected from what? From me? The betrayal was starting to sink in, sharp and cold. Dad, you're almost 70, Thomas said, checking his watch again. Mom was always the one who handled the finances. She was worried you might make impulsive decisions. Impulsive? I built our entire life. Every dollar in those accounts came from my work, my company. Mom's inheritance from her parents started the company, Michael corrected. And she worked alongside you for years. As a part-time bookkeeper, I was shouting now. While raising you 3, I worked 18-hour days for decades. I missed birthdays, baseball games, recitals, all to make sure you had everything you needed. Dad, please calm down, Jessica said. This is what Mom wanted. She was trying to be fair to everyone. Fair? The word felt like ash in my mouth. How is this fair to me? Michael's expression hardened. The business needs younger leadership anyway. You're past retirement age. We've been carrying the load for years while you've been stuck in the past. Carrying the load? I still work 60 hours a week. I brought in the Westridge contract just last month, our biggest project ever. Which we'll now manage, Michael said flatly. It's for the best, Dad. I looked from face to face, these strangers wearing my children's features. Did any of you try to talk your mother out of this? Did any of you stand up for me? The silence was my answer. Robert, Richard interjected, you still have the house and a portion of the liquid assets. You'll be comfortable. Comfortable? This isn't about comfort. This is about respect, about recognition for a lifetime of work. I stood up so quickly my chair toppled backward. This is wrong, all of it. That's when Michael said the words that would change everything. Dad, face reality. You're worth nothing to the family now. Mom was the heart of everything and she made her decisions. The business has outgrown you. It's our turn now." The conference room went completely silent. Even Thomas stopped checking his watch. Then, unexpectedly, Richard laughed. A short, harsh sound that drew everyone's attention. "Is something funny, Richard?" Michael asked, clearly annoyed. Richard shook his head, gathering his papers. "Not funny. No, just ironic. If everyone would follow me to my office. There's another matter we need to discuss." Confused but too shocked to resist, I followed Richard down the hallway to his larger corner office, my children trailing behind. Once inside, Richard closed the door and moved behind his desk. "Please, everyone sit," he instructed, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. I remained standing. Richard sighed. "Robert, please. This will take a few minutes." Reluctantly, I lowered myself into a chair, keeping distance between myself and my children. Richard opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. "Catherine left this with me, with instructions to open it only after the will reading, and only if certain circumstances arose." "What circumstances?" Jessica asked. Richard looked directly at me. "If her children behaved exactly as they just did." He broke the seal on the envelope and removed several pages of documents, along with a smaller sealed envelope. "First, I'm to read this letter." He unfolded a handwritten page covered in Catherine's elegant script. "My dearest Robert," Richard began reading, "if you're hearing this letter, then our children have revealed their true characters in the wake of my death, and Richard has determined you need to know the complete truth." I felt the air leave my lungs. The children shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. During my illness, Michael, Jessica, and Thomas approached me separately and then together, expressing concerns about your ability to manage our assets after I was gone. They suggested changes to my will that would give them immediate control of the company and most of our assets. They spoke of your age, your outdated business practices, and their fears that you would squander their inheritance. Michael started to protest, but Richard held up a hand to silence him. What our children failed to realize is that after 47 years together, you and I have no secrets. We have always been partners in everything. So when they began having private conversations with me, excluding you from the room, I knew exactly what they were doing. I played along. My hands were trembling now. Catherine had known. She had seen through them. With Richard's help, I created the will you heard today. A will designed to reveal our children's true characters. A test, if you will. A test they have obviously failed. Thomas stood up. "This is ridiculous. Mom would never." "Sit down, Thomas," Richard commanded with surprising authority. "Your mother's letter isn't finished." Thomas slowly sank back into his chair. "Now, my beloved husband, here is what you need to know. 2 weeks before revising the will they just heard, you and I signed new wills together, as we've always done. Those are our true wills, legally executed and filed. The document read today was theater. Painful, necessary theater to show you what our children were trying to do. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Catherine had protected me even from beyond the grave. In our actual will, everything comes to you, as we've always planned. The business, the accounts, all of it. You have complete control. What you choose to do with our assets, and with the knowledge of our children's betrayal, is entirely up to you." Michael's face had gone pale. Jessica was gripping the arms of her chair. Thomas sat completely still for the first time. "I'm sorry for the pain this revelation will cause you," Richard continued reading. "I considered telling you while I was still alive, but I couldn't bear to see your heart break as mine did. I hope you can forgive me for this final deception." Richard cleared his throat before continuing. "I leave you with this wisdom, my love. Family isn't always about blood, it's about loyalty, respect, and love that asks for nothing in return. Our children have shown you who they truly are. Believe them. All my love. For all eternity, Catherine." The silence in the room was absolute. I felt tears streaming down my face, but made no move to wipe them away. Richard set down the letter and looked at my children. "The will read in the conference room is null and void. It was never filed. Your mother's actual will, legally executed and properly witnessed, leaves everything to your father." "This is insane," Michael finally sputtered. "Mom wasn't thinking clearly during her illness." "Actually," Richard countered, "Catherine was very clear-headed. She documented every conversation where you and your siblings tried to manipulate her. She recorded several of them on her phone, with my knowledge and legal advice." He held up the small envelope. This flash drive contains those recordings along with copies of text messages and emails from all three of you, discussing your plans to secure the assets before your father could waste them. I felt as though I was watching the scene from outside my body. My children, my flesh and blood, had conspired against me while their mother was dying, had pressured her, manipulated her, all while I was focused solely on trying to save her life. "Dad," Jessica tried, her voice breaking. "We were just trying to protect the family legacy." Mom misunderstood. I finally found my voice. "Your mother understood perfectly. She always could see through people." I turned to Richard. "What happens now?" Richard handed me a folder. "These are your copies of the actual will and supporting documents. As Catherine's widower and the sole beneficiary, you have complete control over all assets. The business remains entirely yours. All financial accounts remain in your name. Nothing has changed from your original estate plan. And my children?" The word felt wrong in my mouth now. "That's entirely up to you," Richard said quietly. I stood up, taking the folder and the small envelope containing the flash drive. "I need time to think." "Of course," Richard nodded. "Take all the time you need." "Dad, wait," Michael called as I headed for the door. "We need to talk about this." I turned back, looking at each of their faces. These strangers I had raised had sacrificed everything for. "No," I said simply. "We don't." I walked out of Richard's office, out of the building, and into the bright afternoon sunlight. The world looked different now, sharper, colder, but somehow more honest. Catherine had given me one final gift: the truth. The drive home was a blur. Traffic lights, stop signs, other vehicles, they all seemed distant, unimportant compared to the storm raging inside me. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, the leather creaking under my fingers. 47 years of marriage, and Catherine had kept this from me. 3 children we'd raised together, and they had revealed themselves to be vultures circling, waiting for their moment. When I pulled into our driveway, my driveway now, the house looked different. The colonial we'd bought as a young couple, with its blue shutters and wraparound porch, had always represented security, family, the fulfillment of the American dream for a kid who grew up with nothing. Now it loomed before me like a museum of lies. I sat in the car for several minutes, engine off, just staring at the front door. How many times had I walked through it? Thousands upon thousands. Carrying groceries, carrying children, carrying Catherine over the threshold the day we moved in, both of us laughing at the old tradition, and most recently, carrying her out one final time, in a hospice-provided wheelchair, so she could feel the sun on her face one last time before the end. Eventually I found the strength to go inside. The house was silent in that peculiar way houses are when they know something has changed forever. I hung my keys on the hook by the door, a small brass plaque Catherine had found at a flea market 20 years ago, engraved with "Home is where your story begins." The irony wasn't lost on me. In the kitchen I poured myself 2 fingers of the expensive scotch Michael had given me for Christmas. I rarely drank it, saving it for special occasions. This seemed fitting, the celebration of a devastating truth. I carried the glass to Catherine's study, a small room off the living room where she used to grade papers during her years as an English teacher, and later, where she kept the household accounts and her personal correspondence. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, Chanel No. 5, the only fragrance she ever wore. I hadn't been able to bring myself to change anything in this room since her death. Her desk was meticulously organized, as always. Pencils in the ceramic holder our daughter had made in 3rd grade. Notepads stacked neatly in the corner. The antique lamp her grandmother had left her casting a warm glow over everything. I set down my drink and opened the center drawer. Inside was her personal stationery, her favorite fountain pen, and a small leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. I hesitated only briefly before picking it up. After today's revelations, privacy seemed a quaint, outdated concept. The journal was dated, starting 6 months after her diagnosis. The first entry hit me like a physical blow. Robert doesn't know yet, but Michael came to see me today while he was at the lumberyard. He had concerns about the business, about what would happen after. He talked about Dad's age, his old-fashioned business practices, how the company needed younger leadership to thrive in the modern construction industry, as if his father hadn't built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing but calloused hands and determination. I listened and nodded and pretended to consider his points. What Michael doesn't understand, what none of our children seem to understand, is that their father and I have no secrets. We've shared every thought, every fear, every triumph for nearly 5 decades. When he spoke about Robert as if he were some doddering old fool who needed to be managed rather than the brilliant, hard-working man who gave them everything, I felt something break inside me. But I smiled and thanked him for his concern. And I began to form a plan. I flipped through more pages, reading Catherine's detailed accounts of similar conversations with Jessica and Thomas, how they approached her separately at first, then began coordinating their efforts, how they used her illness as leverage, suggesting that making these changes to her will would give her peace of mind and reduce Robert's stress during this difficult time. The later entries were harder to read, filled with her disappointment and heartbreak at discovering who our children really were. But there was something else too, a steely determination that had always been at Catherine's core, hidden beneath her gentle exterior. Richard thinks I'm being too harsh, testing them this way. Perhaps I am, but Robert has given everything for this family. Everything. The missed dinners when the children were young because he was working late to make payroll. The vacations cut short because of job site emergencies. The college tuitions paid in full so our children wouldn't start their adult lives burdened by debt. The constant physical toll of construction work that has left his body aching and scarred. And how do they repay him? By treating him as an obstacle to their inheritance. By speaking of him as if he were already gone while I lie here dying. No, I won't allow it. If this is who they truly are, Robert deserves to know. And they deserve whatever consequences come from their actions. The final entry was dated just 3 weeks before she died. It's done. The false will is prepared, and Richard knows what to do. My true will, leaving everything to Robert, is properly filed. I pray I'm wrong about our children. I pray they'll surprise me with their loyalty and love for their father. But if I'm right, if they reveal themselves as the entitled, calculating people I fear they've become, then at least Robert will be protected. At least he'll know the truth before they can hurt him further. I'm so tired now. The pain medication makes it hard to write, but I needed to record this. My final act of love for the man who has been my everything since I was 18 years old. Robert, if you ever read this, and I suspect you will, please know that loving you has been the great privilege of my life. Whatever you decide to do with the truth I've given you, know that I support you completely. You deserved better children than ours turned out to be. But you had the best wife a man could ask for, and I had the best husband. In the end, perhaps that's enough. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. Even in her final weeks, racked with pain and facing her own mortality, Catherine had been protecting me, planning for my future without her, ensuring I wouldn't be blindsided by our children's betrayal after she was gone. I picked up my scotch and walked to the living room window that overlooked our backyard. The garden Catherine had lovingly tended for decades was beginning to bloom, the first daffodils and tulips pushing up through the soil. She wouldn't see them this year, would never again sit on the stone bench beneath the maple tree, reading a novel in the dappled shade. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another voicemail. I didn't need to check to know it was one of the children trying to damage control the situation. I silenced the phone completely and set it on the coffee table. The truth was, I had no idea what to do next. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it left me reeling. These were my children. I had taught Michael to ride a bike in that very backyard, had kissed Jessica's scraped knees and bandaged them carefully, had stayed up all night helping Thomas with his science fair project, when he procrastinated until the last minute. I had memories of their births, first steps, first words, graduations, weddings. I remembered Michael's face when he held his first child, the mixture of terror and wonder that I recognized from my own experience. I remembered Jessica's determined expression as she walked across the stage to receive her MBA, the first in our family to earn an advanced degree. I remembered Thomas's excitement when he got his first job in Silicon Valley, how proud he'd been to make it in such a competitive industry. Where had it all gone wrong? When had they stopped seeing me as their father, their protector, their champion, and started seeing me as an obstacle to their inheritance? An old man to be managed and manipulated? The phone on the coffee table lit up with an incoming call. Jessica this time. I watched it ring until the screen went dark again. In the quiet that followed, I heard Catherine's voice in my memory, from a conversation we'd had shortly after her diagnosis, when the weight of her mortality had first settled on us both. "Promise me something, Robert," she'd said, her hand small and fragile in mine as we sat on a bench in the hospital garden. "Anything," I'd replied without hesitation. "Promise me you won't let them take advantage of your grief. Promise me you'll stand up for yourself, even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard." I hadn't understood then what she was asking. I'd thought she was worried about me falling apart, about well-meaning friends and family members trying to rush me through my grief with platitudes and distractions. Now I understood. She'd already seen it beginning. The calculation in our children's eyes. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. She'd been trying to prepare me in her way. I set down my empty glass and went to the bookcase where we kept our family photo albums. Decades of memories, carefully preserved. I pulled out the most recent one, Christmas 2 years ago, before Catherine's diagnosis. Our last normal holiday together. The photos showed a happy family, grandchildren opening presents, adult children laughing together over eggnog, Catherine and I in matching sweaters she'd insisted we wear, my arm around her shoulders, her head leaning against my chest. It looked real. It had felt real. Had it all been an illusion? Or had something changed in recent years? Had success and comfort bred entitlement? Had our efforts to give our children better lives than we'd had somehow robbed them of the values we'd tried to instill? I closed the album and replaced it on the shelf. Questions without answers, at least for tonight. Exhausted, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. My bedroom now. Catherine's clothes still hung in the closet. Her reading glasses still sat on her nightstand, beside the novel she'd never finish. I hadn't been able to change anything here either. Not yet. I sat on the edge of the bed, our bed, and for the first time since the will reading, since learning of my children's betrayal, I allowed myself to really feel the rage that had been building beneath my shock and hurt. How dare they? How dare they? After everything Catherine and I had sacrificed, after all the love we'd given them, after the countless opportunities we'd provided, after the examples we'd set of hard work, integrity, and family loyalty, the rage burned hot and clean, burning away the confusion and hurt, leaving clarity in its wake. Catherine had given me the truth. Now it was up to me to decide what to do with it. I picked up the folder Richard had given me, containing Catherine's true will and the documentation of our children's betrayal. Inside was also a flash drive containing the recordings she'd secretly made of their conversations. I walked to the small desk in the corner of our room and opened my laptop. It was time to know everything, to hear it all in their own voices, to face the complete, unvarnished truth. For the next several hours, I listened as my children revealed themselves to their dying mother, heard the false concern in their voices, masking naked self-interest, heard them dismissing my decades of experience as outdated, heard them discussing how to manage me after Catherine was gone, as if I were a troublesome child rather than the man who had given them everything. "Jessica, Mom, you know Dad's never been good with money. Remember when he wanted to expand into commercial properties during the recession? If you hadn't talked him out of it, we might have lost everything." What Jessica conveniently forgot was that my instinct to diversify had ultimately proven correct. Just 2 years later, when I finally did expand into commercial construction, it saved the company during a housing market downturn. "Michael, the problem is Dad still thinks it's 1985. He doesn't understand modern construction practices, digital project management, eco-friendly materials. We're losing contracts to younger companies because he's stuck in the past." This from the son who still hadn't bothered to get his general contractor's license, who couldn't read a blueprint without assistance, who relied entirely on the relationships I'd built to secure contracts. "Thomas, look, I know I'm not involved in the day-to-day business, but from an outside perspective, the company needs restructuring. Dad's approach was fine for building the business, but maintaining and growing it requires different skills he doesn't have at his age." My youngest, who had never spent a single day working construction, presuming to lecture his mother about an industry he knew nothing about. The recordings continued, each one more damning than the last. They had coordinated their approach, strategized on how to convince Catherine, even discussed how to phrase things to make their naked self-interest sound like concern for the company's future. By the time I finished listening, it was nearly dawn. I felt hollowed out, emptied of everything except a cold, clear certainty. These were not the children Catherine and I had raised. Or perhaps they were, and we had simply been blind to who they really were all along. Either way, they had made their choice. They had chosen greed over gratitude, entitlement over respect. They had tried to use their mother's illness and death to manipulate their way into wealth they hadn't earned. As the first light of morning filtered through the curtains, I made my decision. Catherine had protected me one final time, had given me the gift of truth when she could have simply let me continue in ignorant devotion to children who didn't deserve it. I would not waste that gift. I would show them exactly what they had tried to throw away. I would teach them the lesson they so desperately needed to learn. About value, about respect, about consequences, and perhaps, if they were capable of it, about redemption. I showered and dressed with care, choosing one of my better suits, charcoal gray, with the blue tie Catherine had given me for our last anniversary. "It brings out your eyes," she'd said, smoothing it against my chest with hands already weakened by her illness. Then I called Richard. The next few days passed in a blur. I slept little, ate less, and thought constantly. I reviewed the materials Catherine and Richard had compiled, the recordings, the messages, the emails. I listened to my children plotting, calculating, dismissing my decades of work as if it meant nothing. I read their cruel assessments of my business acumen, my intelligence, my worth to the family now that Catherine was gone. The betrayal was total, and it went back further than Catherine's illness. Messages from years earlier revealed their impatience, their entitlement to what I had built. They had been waiting, watching, biding their time. On Friday morning, 1 week after the will reading, I made my decision. I called Richard. "I need you to arrange a meeting. Same conference room, Monday at 10 a.m. "Everyone?" Richard asked. "Yes. And I need some documents prepared." Richard listened as I outlined my plan. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Are you sure about this, Robert? It's severe." "I'm sure," I replied. Catherine wanted me to see the truth. Now I have, and I know exactly what needs to be done. The weekend passed slowly. I received multiple calls from each of my children, which I let go to voicemail. Their messages evolved from angry demands for explanation, to tearful pleas for understanding, to calculated attempts at manipulation. I listened to each one, recognizing the tactics they had used on their mother during her most vulnerable time. By Monday morning, I felt calm, resolved. I had mourned not only my wife but also the children I thought I had. The people showing up today were not those children. They were strangers wearing familiar faces. I arrived at Richard's office early again, this time by design. Richard met me in the lobby. "Everything is prepared as you requested," he said, leading me to his office rather than the conference room. "Are you ready for this?" "More than ready," I assured him. At precisely 10 a.m., the receptionist led Michael, Jessica, and Thomas into Richard's office. They looked tired, worried. "Good. Dad," Michael began immediately, "we've been trying to reach you." I held up my hand. "Sit down, all of you." Something in my voice, a hardness they'd never heard before, made them comply without argument. "For the past week, I've been reviewing everything. The recordings, the messages, the emails. I've heard and seen exactly what you think of me, of my life's work." "Dad, those were taken out of context," Jessica tried. "Stop talking," I said flatly. "You've done enough talking. Behind my back, while your mother was dying. Today, you're going to listen." I opened the folder Richard had prepared and removed the first document. "This is my resignation as CEO of Mitchell Construction, effective immediately." Their expressions shifted from concern to confusion, then to the beginning of satisfaction. "Michael, as of today, you are CEO. Jessica, you are CFO. Thomas, despite your complete lack of interest or experience in construction, you get a meaningless title and a seat on the board. Congratulations, you've won." Michael couldn't hide his smile. "Dad, I think this is for the best. We can modernize operations, expand into new markets." "I'm not finished," I interrupted. "Richard, please distribute the rest of the documents." Richard handed each of my children a thick packet. "What you're holding is a complete financial and operational audit of Mitchell Construction, conducted by an independent firm over the past week. Turn to page 3. Pages rustled as they complied. You'll see that over the past 5 years, the company has secured contracts worth $157 million. Impressive. What you may not know is that I personally brought in $142 million of that business through relationships I've built over decades. I let that sink in before continuing. Page 7 shows our client retention rate, 94%. Almost all of our business is repeat clients or referrals from satisfied customers. Clients who trust me, Personally. Michael's smile had faded. Page 12 details our current projects and commitments. 15 active construction sites, 37 pending contracts, and 62 maintenance agreements. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline where several of my buildings stood. Here's what happens next. I'm calling each of our clients personally to inform them of the leadership change. I'll explain that I've been forced out by my children, who have virtually no hands-on construction experience. I'll release them from their contracts with no penalty if they choose not to work with you. You can't do that, Michael protested. Actually, he can, Richard interjected. Most of those contracts have change of control clauses that Robert insisted on years ago. I'm also contacting our subcontractors, I continued. The plumbers, electricians, carpenters, and suppliers I've worked with for decades. The ones who prioritize our jobs because of their relationship with me. They'll be interested to know how business will be conducted moving forward. Jessica was frantically flipping through the audit. You're trying to destroy the company. I turned back to face them. No, you did that the moment you decided I was worthless to the family. I'm simply showing you the reality of your decision. I picked up another document from Richard's desk. This is my new will. It leaves nothing, not $1, to any of you. My entire estate will be divided between the scholarship fund Catherine and I started at the community college and a trust for construction apprenticeships for disadvantaged youth. Thomas finally spoke up. Dad, you're overreacting. We never said you were worthless. You're worth nothing to the family now. I quoted Michael's exact words. And you all sat there, agreeing silently. I sat down again, feeling strangely light. You have a choice to make. Right now. You can have the company with all the challenges I've outlined. I'll walk away completely. Or what? Michael asked warily. Or you can sign these. I nodded to Richard, who produced 3 identical documents and placed one in front of each of my children. What is this? Jessica asked, scanning the first page. A new agreement. You each retain 10% ownership in the company. I keep 70%. I remain CEO for 3 more years, during which time I will actually train you properly to take over, something you never bothered to request. You'll work under me, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. No shortcuts, no entitlement. And if we refuse, Michael challenged, then you get what you wanted. The company is yours, along with the mass exodus of clients and contractors that will follow. Your choice. The room fell silent as they read through the agreements. You need to decide now, I added. The calls to clients begin at noon today. Jessica was the first to reach for a pen. Thomas followed quickly. Michael hesitated longest, his pride warring with his pragmatism. Finally, he too signed. Richard collected the signed agreements. I'll have copies made for everyone. One more thing, I said, standing again. The agreement includes a morality clause. Any further attempts to undermine me, any conversations like the ones you had with your mother, and you lose everything. Immediately and permanently. Are we clear? 3 subdued voices murmured agreement. Good. Michael and Jessica, be at the office tomorrow at 6 a.m. You'll be visiting the Westridge site with me. Thomas, book a flight back from California. You start next Monday, on a construction site, not in an office. I walked to the door, then paused. Catherine wanted me to know who you really are. Now I do. Whether you can become people worthy of her memory, worthy of the Mitchell name, is up to you. Don't waste this second chance, it's the only one you'll get. I walked out without waiting for their response. 3 years have passed since that day in Richard's office. Much has changed. Michael turned out to have a genuine talent for construction management once he stopped trying to take shortcuts. Jessica's financial acumen, properly directed, has made the company more profitable than ever. Even Thomas found his place, developing software specifically for construction project management that we're now licensing to other companies. They've worked hard to rebuild my trust. I've seen genuine remorse in their actions, if not always in their words. We'll never have the relationship I once thought we had, but we've built something new. Something based on truth, rather than illusion. Last month, I officially retired. The company is theirs now, though I maintain that 70% ownership as insurance against backsliding. I've moved to a smaller house near the coast, where Catherine and I always talked about retiring someday. In my study, I keep a photograph of Catherine taken a month before her diagnosis. She's smiling in our garden, surrounded by the roses she loved. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, I talk to her. I tell her about the business, about our grandchildren who visit me regularly now, about the scholarship students who send me thank you letters. You were right, I tell her. Family isn't always about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and love that asks for nothing in return. In the end, Catherine gave me the most precious gift possible, the truth. And with that truth, painful as it was, came the opportunity to build something authentic from the ashes of illusion. Our children learned a harsh lesson about value, the value of experience, of relationships built over decades, of integrity that can't be bought or sold. They learned that worth isn't measured in dollars or ownership percentages, but in trust earned through actions. As for me, I learned that even at 68, it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, to insist on the recognition you've earned. Catherine knew that all along. Somehow she always knew exactly what we all needed to learn. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.